Math 1108, Section 9.5, Applications with Quadratic Equations continued. At the end of the last video, we were in the process of solving this problem. We're trying to find the speed of the current, which is what x represents. And we got to this point right here, so we just multiply 24 times 5 plus x to get 120 plus 24x. And then we add 24 times 5 minus x, which is plus 120 minus 24x. And then multiply on the right-hand side 10 times the quantity 25 minus x squared to get 250 minus 10x squared. Okay, so on another piece of paper, I've written that down. We'll just proceed to solve this equation. On the left-hand side, we can add 120 to 120 to get 240. And then the plus 24x minus 24x, those combine to make 0. So we have 240 equals 250 minus 10x to the second. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add 10x to the second to both sides and subtract 240 from both sides. 250 minus 240 is 10. Then divide both sides by 10. I get x squared equals 1. And then we'll use the square root property. If x squared equals 1, then x equals positive and negative square root of 1, or x equals positive and negative 1. But in the context of the problem, x equals positive 1 is the only solution that makes sense, and x represents the speed of the current in miles per hour. So the speed of the current is 1 miles per hour. Okay, we'll move on to the next problem, problem number 5. The area of a rectangle is 140 square feet. Its length is 6 less than twice the width. So find the length and the width of the triangle, of the rectangle. So if you want to draw a triangle, you can. Sorry, a rectangle. And let's label the width. Let's label it x feet, and the length, we're told what the length is in terms of the width. The length is 6 less than twice the width. So if the width is x feet, the length is 2x minus 6. And then the area of the rectangle is 140 square feet. So we know that if you multiply the length times the width of a rectangle, you get the area. So 2x minus 6 times x equals 140. And we just have a quadratic equation. So we multiply everything out. We'll subtract 140 from both sides and get the quadratic equation in standard form. Note here that we can divide every term on both sides of the equation by 2. Without a problem, so we get x squared minus 3x minus 70 equals 0. And then we can use the quadratic formula to solve this. In this equation, a is 1, b is negative 3, and c is negative 70. And so x equals the negative of negative 3 plus and minus the square root of the number negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 70. And this is all divided by 2 times 1. Then we just do the arithmetic. The negative of negative 3 is 3, plus and minus the square root of some number, all divided by 2. So inside the square root, the number negative 3 squared is 9, and we're subtracting 4 times 1 times negative 70. So in other words, it's 9 minus negative 280, but that's the same as 9 plus 280, which is 289. And the square root of 289 simplifies to 17. And we want the solution that's positive because the other solution, being negative, does not make sense in the context of this problem. So the solution that we want is x equals 3 plus 17 over 2, or 20 over 2, or 10. So the width of the rectangle is 10 feet, And the length, 2 times 10 minus 6, is 14 feet. And you can verify that the area is 140 square feet. Okay, in the next problem, number 6, the height h in feet of a projectile shot upward is given by h equals negative 16t to the second plus 64t plus 80 after t seconds. Find the number of seconds it takes for the projectile to hit the ground. Well, the height of the projectile when it hits the ground is 0, so we replace h with 0 and then solve the equation for t. So 0 equals negative 16t to the second plus 64t plus 80. And we can get rid of some of the clutter that's in the way. We can divide every term on both sides of this equation by negative 16. 0 divided by negative 16 is 0. Negative 16t to the second divided by negative 16 is t to the second. 64t divided by negative 16 is minus 4t. And 80 divided by negative 16 is negative 5. And we can use the quadratic formula, but we can easily solve this equation by factoring. T minus 5 and t plus 1 are the two factors. The two solutions to the equation are positive 5 and negative 1, but only the positive solution makes sense. So t equals 5 seconds is how long it takes for the projectile to hit the ground. Okay, and the next problem it's a geometric problem. So on this one, we're told that the diagonal distance of a rectangle is 5 feet longer than the width, and the length is 3 times the width. Find the length of the rectangle's diagonal. Okay, so maybe drawing a picture will help on this one. Okay, so the diagonal distance turns out to be the hypotenuse of a right triangle if it's a diagonal of a rectangle. Okay, and we're told that the diagonal distance is 5 feet longer than the width, and the length is 3 times the width. So let's pick x to be the width, since everything is described in terms of the width. So the width is x feet. The diagonal, or the hypotenuse of the right triangle, is x plus 5 because we're given that information. It's 5 feet longer than the width. And the length is 3 times the width, so the length is 3x. Then we remember the Pythagorean Theorem. If you square the length of the hypotenuse, so the hypotenuse is x plus 5. So if we square the length of the hypotenuse, that's equal to the sum of the squares of the lengths of the two legs. So we square the width, x squared, and when we square the length, we have to square the term 3x. This equation is just a quadratic equation, so we multiply everything out, combine like terms, set one side equal to 0, and then at the very least we can use the quadratic formula to solve. So on the right-hand side, x squared plus 9x squared becomes 10x squared. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides and subtract 10x from both sides and subtract 25 from both sides. And then I can write it as 9x squared minus 10x minus 25 equals 0. And then we could use the quadratic formula to solve for x. So a is 9, b is negative 10, and c is negative 25. Okay, so we write x equals the negative of negative 10 plus and minus the square root of the number negative 10 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 25, all divided by 2 times 9. And then we do the arithmetic. So the negative of negative 10 is 10, plus and minus the square root of some number all divided by 18. And inside the square root, negative 10 squared is 100. And we're subtracting 4 times 9 times negative 25. So in other words, we're subtracting negative 900, but 100 minus negative 900 is the same as 100 plus 900. And so we get x equals 10. Since x represents the width of a rectangle, we don't need to consider the solution we get by subtracting, because that second solution is negative. So we'll just look at 10 plus the square root of 1,000, all divided by 18. And we can simplify the square root of 1,000. The largest factor of 1,000 that's a perfect square is 100. 100 times 10 is 1,000. The square root of 100 is 10, so we get 10 plus 10 times the square root of 10 in the numerator divided by 18. And we can write this in simpler terms. Every term in the numerator and the denominator have 2 as a common factor. So when we cancel the common factor of 2, we just get 5 plus 5 times the square root of 10 in the numerator and 9 in the denominator. So you can convert this to a decimal number and round it to however many number of decimal places you want. But for now, I'll just leave it in this form. Okay, for problem number 8, we have another problem involving shooting an arrow upward. The height h in feet of an arrow shot upward after t seconds is h equals negative 16 t to the second plus 240 t. Find the number of seconds it takes for the arrow to be at a height of 400 feet. Okay, so what we do on this one, we replace h with 400 because the height of the arrow at some point in the trajectory is 400, and set 400 equal to negative 16 t to the second plus 240 t. So we get another quadratic equation, this time in the variable t. So what I'll do is I'll add 16t to the second to both sides and subtract 240t from both sides. And we get the equation 16t to the second minus 240t plus 400 equals 0. We can also get rid of some of the clutter that's in the way if we divide every term on both sides by 16. So 16t to the second is just t to the second, and minus 240t divided by 16 is minus 15t, and then divide 400 by 16, we get plus, what's wrong with you, 25? Yes, of course, 400 divided by 16 is 25, and that's equal to 0. So we can use the quadratic formula on this. So for this one, a is 1, b is negative 15, and c is 25. So we write t equals the negative of negative 15 plus and minus the square root of the number negative 15 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25. And this is all divided by 2 times 1. Then we do some arithmetic. The negative of negative 15 is 15, plus and minus the square root of negative 15 squared is 225, and minus 4 times 1 times 25 is minus 100. This is all divided by 2. And we'll simplify a little bit more. 15 plus and minus the square root of 125, all divided by 2. And we can simplify the square root of 125, but since the video ends at 15 minutes, I'll leave the rest of that for you to do.